Hey everyone, this is my mini series of how I texture objects for games and animation scenes. So for this tutorial, I will have the first part be about prepping your model UV textures and exporting it for the actual Substance Painter, and then part 2 will go over the actual painting in color, and then part 3 will be bringing it back into Maya, getting it game ready. A lot of what I'm explaining today and I learned through these super awesome creators on YouTube. Abe Leal 3D is one of my favorite. He has tons of tutorials and portfolio reviews of making game ready assets, making gorgeous things, and exploring new tools and new programs. Specifically, his Maya chess tutorial is super beginner friendly, super great, and we'll go over in more detail a lot of what I'm explaining. Another great one, Stylized Station, explains a lot of cool game mechanics or ways people do things. I like a lot of their official tutorials and courses, but they also have fun videos of how game things work. Specifically, this learning the basics of hand-painted textures and making stylized textures I found are the two most helpful when I was learning and getting into this. I will have everything linked down below. So, to start, we have our object. The base material and shader is fine, but I like adding lighting to my scene and a material to brighten it so I can see the shapes a little bit better. This one material currently is a shader that's missing files, so it just kind of fills out to white, and that works for now, but you can also just stick a lambert on this and pick a nice color. I also tend to work in wireframe mode, just so I can see how my actual surface is looking and going from there. I wanted to really quick show you some tools to help get stylized models really easily. This particular model is for a different project, so I will be keeping it nice and square, but just to show you, two tools I really like are the lattice tool, which will be under your deform tab here. We're going to click the little squares so we can adjust. I played around with these, so I already know my divisions, but you can change around how many divisions it has, and it essentially puts a little box around your object, like this. And why this is cool is you can then select lattice points and adjust them, and it'll warp your object, kind of like a transform tool kind of thing. So this is kind of cool. You can warp your object, make it stylized without having to move every individual point on your objects. You can kind of shift things and like shrink them, grow them. And then once you have a fun little like funky shaped object, you can then select the object, come into your channel box editor, delete history, and it'll delete that lattice. So now we've got a fun little funky chest. Another thing I like to use is, or you can use, so you can select points you kind of want to warp a little bit, go to your transform tool, which is under edit mesh, click that little square again, and you're going to select random to 1, it's normally at 0, click apply, and then I click this little circle to activate the transform node, and then just click on these squares so it's scale. And then as I scale up, you'll notice everything kind of moves at a random point. So this can be fun for like having edges be all warped and stuff. I maybe wouldn't do all of these points. And you can kind of just play around with that and get a fun little warped kind of extrude essentially, but you can also play with like movement and stuff as well and do the same thing. So then I like to go and deselect everything, check do I like that shape and stuff. So there's some quick and easy warped tools and techniques. I'm gonna go ahead and undo all of that because again, for the game I'm making, I just need the basic set square. Next, we're gonna hop into UVs. I was already in the UV editing workspace, but it's, you want to make sure you just have your UV editor window open. And I've already UV unwrapped this, so if you want to more in-depth how to cut and sew things, again, go check out those tutorials I showed you. And you'll notice these UVs don't look great. That's because these knobs all have their own UVs. Normally, if I were to UV unwrap this, I'd have this all be the same material and then move these into the corner where I have space. But since I have a couple of other knobs in my scene that I want to be matching and all the same, I decided to give the knobs their own material. So I'll just move these aside for now so you can kind of see our UVs. But here's my UV unwrap. Pretty basic. A lot of this is camera based. I like to do camera based over automatic because then I know I'm coming from a certain view and I can cut where I want it to. Some of these are probably unnecessarily separated, so I'd probably go through and sew a lot of these down. But the biggest thing you want to make sure is that all of your UVs are roughly the same size. And so you can see when you put it into the checker map mode, all of these squares are roughly the same size, even though these UVs are all, different sizes. So this is important so you have quality control over your textures in your model. If you want something more detailed, you want to make it bigger. Oh, hold on. And so those squares will be smaller. So if I wanted like the drawers to be high detail, it wouldn't make sense for a background object, but it would make a lot of sense on like a character where the back of the head doesn't need to be high detailed if it's hidden, or like the hair versus the face where you want a lot of the detail. And if I go ahead and select these knobs, you can see the squares on this are a lot smaller of a texture because again, these are being applied to multiple models. The other thing you want to keep in mind when you have something more organic like this knob is where you have your seams. Because this is a rounded shape, it's going to need a seam somewhere, and that's going to affect your textures. So I put this seam on the bottom because you're unlikely to see the bottom, so if I have a little bit of trouble texturing there, it's not a huge deal. I also cut these triangles so that instead of making this just kind of a face, because I want it to kind of all line up here and I don't want a seam around the circle. But another way you could UV this if you did want more detail on the tip here instead of a point is have this whole circle be a separate UV and then everything kind of wraps around it. And again, checking to make sure all of the squares line up and keeping in mind where you're going to be adding textures. These squares not lining up are where textures might be harder to do hand painting and stuff on. So if this seems going to be an issue, then maybe you want to retexture this differently. Again, organic models, it's a lot of where you do and don't want seams. For a character, a lot of times I want to lay it out like a bear rug, but you have to keep in mind where those seams are. If you have seams on top of your arms, then that's going to be visual in your textures. So it might be better to actually separate the arms from the front and back and have the arms unwrap with just a single seam, right? Because they're cylindrical. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, once you're done UV unwrapping everything, you're going to go ahead, select your object, export selection. And then this will pop up. You can do FBX, but since we'll be bringing the textures back into Maya, I like to export it as OBJ. You don't need all of the extra data and stuff that's saved on an FBX. You don't need that texture information. And I just like to save it next to my scene because I'm likely to delete it later, and that way I know where it's saved. So we'll go ahead and name this just like drawer, export selection. If you're texturing a whole scene, you'll want to make sure you have different materials applied to everything before exporting so that you can separate those in Substance Painter. But if you're just doing one object, then you're good to just export it with default material. So I'll see you guys in the next video when we're in Substance Painter.